The sky above the secluded cliffside villa blazed with the last golden streaks of sunlight, spilling across the horizon like molten honey. Elena stood on the balcony, the gentle breeze tugging at her silk gown, and exhaled a breath she didn't know she had been holding. The world below was silent, the waves rolling against jagged rocks with a soft, rhythmic persistence that seemed to echo the storm in her chest. She had imagined this moment countless times. The honeymoon after the whirlwind wedding, soft laughter, stolen kisses. The sense of calm she had craved for years, but reality was heavier, quieter, and far more intimate than any fantasy could have prepared her for. Inside the villa, soft footsteps approached, deliberate yet gentle. Elena's heart skipped a beat, a familiar tension curling in her stomach, a mixture of anticipation and something she couldn't name. When the door swung open, he was there, Adrian, tall, composed, a presence that seemed to fill every corner of the room even before he spoke. His eyes, a stormy shade of gray, held something she had never seen in anyone before, a tension so complete it made her feel exposed, yet safe at the same time. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stepped into the golden light of the room, letting silence linger, letting her notice the subtle details, the way his hand brushed the edge of the door, the faint scent of cedar, and something uniquely his own that made her pulse quicken. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, measured, not the kind that demanded answers but invited them, as if every word had been chosen to unsettle her just enough to break through the walls she had built. She nodded, her fingers clutching the balcony railing, nails pressing into the smooth wood. I think so," she whispered. It was a lie, but not entirely. Part of her felt exhilaration, a lightness she hadn't known since childhood, and part of her felt the weight of the unknown pressing against her ribs. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint creases near his eyes, the quiet intensity of his gaze. "You don't have to pretend here," he said softly. "Not with me." The words were simple, but they struck something deep within her, a chord she hadn't realized was waiting to be played. For years, she had performed for everyone else, her colleagues, her family, the world. She had smiled when she felt nothing, laughed when her heart ached, bowed when she wanted to run. And yet, here was someone who seemed to see straight through every carefully constructed layer, who didn't flinch at what he found. Elena's breath hitched. She wanted to speak, to explain, to offer some semblance of herself she could control, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she let the silence stretch, allowed the tension to hang between them like a fragile thread holding two worlds together. Then Adrian did something entirely unexpected. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers warm and unyielding around hers. The contact sent a shiver up her arm, a spark she could neither name nor ignore. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no urgency, no demand, only a question, as if he were offering her a choice. In that moment, everything shifted. The fear she had carried for weeks, the doubts and rehearsed defenses, melted beneath the weight of that single question. It was not the act itself, but the invitation, the trust implicit in asking that changed everything. Her heart hammered in her chest, a chaotic symphony of anticipation and something far deeper, hope. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw not the man the world had painted in headlines and whispered rumors, but someone capable of tenderness, someone who understood that connection was not about possession, but about permission. Her lips trembled, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to answer honestly. A small nod, almost imperceptible, was enough. It was not surrender, it was trust. Adrian smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and together they stepped into a new rhythm, a shared space where fear and expectation were replaced by the fragile, exhilarating possibility of love. Outside, the ocean roared softly, the waves catching the last rays of sunlight, and Eleanor realized that nothing would ever be the same. This moment, this whispered invitation, had opened a door to a life she hadn't dared to imagine, a life where vulnerability was not weakness, where trust could build something stronger than any contract, any expectation, any fear. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fire and gold, she felt it, the first real pulse of hope in years, steady and undeniable, a promise that perhaps love, the kind that changed hearts forever, was not a story for other people, It could be hers if she chose to step through that quiet, trembling doorway. The morning light seeped through the gauzy curtains, painting the room in gentle shades of cream and gold. Elena woke slowly, the warmth of Adrian's presence beside her still lingering in her mind, a quiet echo that made her chest ache with an unfamiliar tenderness. She had expected mornings to be routine, dull, filled with polite conversation and the heavy weight of obligation, but this was different. Everything about this place, this time, felt like stepping into a story she hadn't dared to dream. Adrian was already awake, sitting at the edge of the balcony, a cup of steaming tea in his hands. He looked out over the cliffs, the waves below glinting like scattered diamonds. His posture relaxed, almost unguarded. For the first time, Elena noticed the subtle details that had gone unseen before, the gentle curve of his shoulders, the way his fingers lingered on the cup as if savoring not just the tea but the quiet, private moment. There was a softness there, a vulnerability that didn't diminish his presence, but made it more real, more human. "You're up early," she said softly, wrapping herself in the robe she had discarded the night before. Her voice carried a hesitance she couldn't disguise, a lingering shadow of old fears that told her closeness was dangerous. But beneath it, a spark of curiosity burned. What would happen if she let herself step fully into this new reality? He turned his head, eyes meeting hers with that same piercing intensity that had unsettled her and fascinated her in equal measure. "I like to watch the sunrise," he said simply, but his gaze held layers of meaning she couldn't yet decode. "It feels grounding." There was a pause, almost imperceptible, as if he were testing the air, measuring how much of himself he could share without breaking the fragile trust forming between them. "And you?" I never watch them," she admitted, the words hesitant. "I usually sleep through mornings, or rush through them, pretending they don't exist." She laughed lightly, a sound she hadn't realized was rare, and Adrian's expression softened in response. There was no judgment, only understanding. For a moment, they stood in silence, the space between them alive with unspoken possibility. Elena realized she had spent so much of her life constructing walls, layers of protection, designed to keep disappointment and pain at bay, that she had almost forgotten how it felt to be seen without those defenses. And now, with a simple glance, a soft-spoken question, Adrian was peeling those walls away, brick by brick, leaving her exposed but unafraid. "Tell me about your mornings," he said, tilting his head slightly. His tone invited honesty, encouraged vulnerability without demanding it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself speaking, words flowing like a river she had long dammed up. She told him of early childhood memories, of quiet walks in the park, of secret dreams she had buried under practicality and caution. And he listened, not politely, not as one waits for a turn to speak, but with the attention of someone who recognized the weight of every word, who understood that stories were not just entertainment, they were the threads that wove a life together. When she finally fell silent, Adrian's eyes held hers with something steady, something profound. "You've carried a lot alone," he observed, not as accusation, but as recognition. "And you've done it well, but you don't have to anymore." Her throat tightened. She had never imagined anyone speaking that truth to her with such quiet authority, such sincerity. The world had taught her to hide her fear, to contain her heart, to accept that protection meant isolation. Yet here was someone not only inviting her to lower the guard she had clung to for decades, but offering to stand beside her, unflinching, patient, and unwavering. The morning stretched on, and with each passing hour, Elena felt the stirrings of transformation, subtle but undeniable. A walk along the cliffside brought laughter she hadn't realized she missed, moments of shared silence that spoke louder than words, and gentle touches that conveyed trust, curiosity, and the tentative beginnings of love. Each glance, each gesture, each whispered remark seemed to chip away at the fear she had carried, leaving a growing certainty. Her life was shifting, irrevocably, and she could no longer deny it. That evening, as the sun dipped low, spilling amber and rose across the water, Adrian reached for her hand once more. The touch was familiar now, comforting yet electric, a reminder of the intimacy that had begun to take root between them. He leaned closer, eyes searching hers as if asking a question she had not yet heard aloud. Are you ready to see what's possible? And in that moment, Elena realized she was. Not because the path ahead would be easy, far from it, but because for the first time, someone had shown her that love could be both tender and brave. A force capable of transforming fear into courage, doubt into hope. The question hung between them, unspoken but understood. And she answered with the simplest gesture of trust, a nod, small but absolute. It was not surrender. It was choice. It was the recognition that the story she had been waiting for was not written in the past, nor dictated by circumstance, but crafted by the courage to embrace what lay before her. And as the stars began to pierce the twilight sky, Elena felt it deep within her chest, a pulse of possibility, fierce and undeniable, signaling the first steps of a journey that would change everything. The morning mist lingered over the hillside, curling around the trees like whispered secrets. Elena had woken early again, drawn to the quiet, as though the world itself was urging her to pay attention, to notice the small miracles hiding in the ordinary. She found Adrian already awake, perched on the edge of the veranda with a notebook in his hands, jotting down words that seemed to carry the weight of thoughtfulness and care. The sight of him so absorbed, so calm, made her chest ache in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "You're here early," he said, not looking up, his voice soft, intimate. "I thought I might find you wandering the gardens." "I needed a moment," she admitted, stepping closer. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers, carrying the sharp tang of the ocean in the distance. A moment to breathe. He finally looked at her, eyes capturing the sunlight and reflecting it back like quiet understanding. "Sometimes," he said, "the world gives us a chance to pause, to see what really matters. Most people walk right past it, distracted, unaware." His words weren't lectures. They weren't demands. They were invitations, delicate yet impossible to ignore. Elena felt herself drawn into the gravity of his gaze, her pulse quickening, not with fear but with the strange, undeniable thrill of being seen, not for what she pretended to be, but for who she truly was. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what it would feel like to stop protecting every corner of her heart, to step fully into this space between them, where trust and curiosity intertwined. "I don't usually stop to see," she confessed, her voice small but steady. "I move too fast, afraid that if I look, I'll find something I'm not ready for." Adrian's expression softened, and he gestured toward the gardens. "Then start now. Start here. Start with me. You don't need to be ready. You just need to begin." There was a quiet power in his words, a strength that didn't demand obedience, but offered possibility. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. Possibility, something she had almost forgotten existed in her life. They walked together, slowly letting the path wind around them, their hands occasionally brushing, fingers grazing with delicate, electric intimacy. Each touch was a question, each glance a tentative answer. It wasn't about grand declarations or dramatic gestures. It was about noticing, about understanding that love, real love, often grows in the spaces between moments. In the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence, Adrian stopped suddenly, pointing to a cluster of wildflowers that had somehow thrived in the cracks of the stone path. "Look at them," he said, voice tinged with wonder. "They grow where no one expects them to, against the odds, thriving because they choose to exist, not because the world notices." Elena's breath caught. She understood immediately. She had been living carefully, hiding her dreams, her heart, in the shadows, waiting for someone or something to approve her existence. And yet here was a man pointing out the beauty of life that flourished quietly, unseen. Just like her own courage and hope, she felt her chest tighten, a mixture of recognition and longing, as though she had been given permission to finally bloom. They continued walking, the conversation flowing in delicate fragments, stories of childhood, hopes unspoken, dreams they had both tucked away behind fear. Every word seemed to carry weight, yet the moment never felt heavy. There was a lightness, a freedom, in sharing pieces of themselves that no one else had asked for or understood. And with each revelation, the bond between them deepened, subtle but undeniable, like a river carving its path through stone over centuries. By the time they returned to the villa, the sun had climbed higher, golden and warm, casting the world in clarity. Elena paused at the threshold, feeling a strange combination of exhilaration and apprehension. Adrian noticed, and without words, took her hand, letting the simple connection speak for both of them. "You're changing," he said quietly, as if noting a phenomenon in the natural world. "Not because of me, but because you've let yourself see, let yourself feel. You've started to trust the rhythm of your own heart again." Her lips trembled. It was true. She could feel the shift inside her, subtle but unstoppable. The walls she had built, the fears that had dictated her life, were beginning to crumble not from force, but from quiet, deliberate choice. And in that moment, standing beside him, she realized that the journey they had begun together was more than just a story of love. It was a story of awakening, of rediscovery, of courage that neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Adrian squeezed her hand, a soft, grounding pressure that spoke of understanding and reassurance. "And this," he said, "is just the beginning. There's more ahead, more challenges, more wonder, more moments that will test you, and more that will inspire you." Elena looked up at him, her eyes shining, and smiled. "I'm ready," she whispered. And in that word, in that fragile, brave declaration, she felt the pulse of life stronger than ever before, the pulse of love, trust, and the promise of something extraordinary. And in the stillness of that morning, with the world unfolding around them, she knew with certainty that this story, the one she had never dared to imagine, was hers to write. Step by step, moment by moment, she would walk forward, no longer in fear, but in hope. The first rain of the season began quietly, soft droplets tracing delicate paths down the windows of the villa. Elena stood by the glass, mesmerized by the rhythm of the rain, a cadence that seemed to echo her own heartbeat. The world outside blurred into a watercolor of gray and green, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the depth of her emotions without judgment. The fear that had once defined her mornings, the careful calculations of safety and distance, seemed almost laughable now. She had stepped into a space where vulnerability was no longer a weakness, but a doorway to transformation. Adrian appeared beside her, his presence as steady and grounding as the earth beneath their feet. He handed her a warm cup of tea, the aroma of herbs and citrus rising in gentle spirals. "Rain always reminds me," he said softly, "that life can be both gentle and relentless, and that we have to learn to move with it rather than against it." His words resonated deeply, as if they had been whispered directly into the part of her heart that had long been asleep. Elena took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her chest. "I used to fear storms," she admitted. "Not just the weather, but the storms of life, the unpredictability, the pain. I thought the only way to survive was to hold myself apart, to control everything I could." Her voice faltered as she realized how much courage it took to speak the truth aloud. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't judge. He simply listened, his gray eyes reflecting understanding and something more, encouragement. "You survived," he said quietly, almost reverently. "And now you're learning something far more important, how to live." The words were simple, yet their weight settled in her chest like a stone, grounding her in the realization that her past did not define her future. She had been carrying the remnants of fear and caution for years, but here, in this quiet sanctuary, she could let them fall away. The rain thickened, and without thinking, Elena felt a pull, a desire to step outside, to feel the storm on her skin, to immerse herself in the wildness she had always avoided. Adrian noticed immediately, his hand brushing against hers, an unspoken question. She nodded, a spark of daring in her eyes. Together, they stepped into the rain, the drops soaking through their clothes, clinging to their skin, yet bringing with them a sense of liberation she had never known. They ran through the gardens, laughter breaking free in bursts that echoed against the stone paths, raw and unrestrained. Each moment was electric, alive with the thrill of spontaneity and the deep joy of being truly present. For Elena, it was more than a game or a fleeting pleasure, it was a revelation. She realized that life did not have to be meticulously planned. That joy could be found in surrender, in letting go, and in trusting the people who mattered enough to walk beside you. When they finally paused beneath a large oak, dripping with rain, Adrian pulled her close, the heat of his body contrasting with the coolness of the storm. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice low, almost hypnotic. This freedom, the realization that you can trust yourself, trust me, and still find strength in the unknown? Elena nodded, the sensation of liberation coursing through her like electricity. She had always equated control with safety, yet here she was, drenched, laughing, alive in a way that felt like rebirth. As the storm eased, they returned inside, shivering but exhilarated, and Elena found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The whispers, the quiet moments, the trust she had begun to cultivate, they were threads weaving together a tapestry of courage and hope. She realized that the story of her life was no longer about fear, isolation, or cautious survival. It was about awakening, about embracing love and connection, about stepping into moments that demanded vulnerability and offering herself fully, without reservation. That night, as they sat by the fire with soft music playing in the background, Adrian reached for her hand once again. "You've grown," he said gently, tracing circles on her palm. "Not because I told you to, not because the world forced you, but because you allowed yourself to be seen. And in being seen, you've found your strength." Elena swallowed, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had always thought strength meant armor, distance, and discipline. But here, in this quiet sanctuary, she understood that true strength was about courage, about the willingness to open your heart despite uncertainty, and to embrace life fully in all its chaos and beauty. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the air fresh and vibrant, carrying the scent of earth and renewal. Elena looked at Adrian, her gaze steady, filled with something she hadn't dared to admit before, a quiet certainty that the journey ahead, no matter the obstacles, would be worth it. With trust, courage, and love guiding her, she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the whispers of possibility, the sparks of connection, and the power of transformation were now part of her story forever. The morning sun had barely kissed the horizon when Elena awoke to a silence that felt different, heavier than usual. It wasn't the quiet of peace or reflection, but a quiet that hinted at change, at the subtle tension of life pressing forward with its inevitable trials. She sat up slowly, listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside the window and the distant cry of seabirds, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and unease coiling in her chest. Today felt like a turning point, one of those rare moments when life quietly demands you step forward. Whether you are ready or not, Adrian was already awake, standing by the window, gazing at the world with that same calm intensity she had come to recognize. But today, there was a shadow behind his eyes, a weight she couldn't immediately name. He turned when he noticed her watching, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach the corners of his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady, but Elena caught the subtle tension beneath it. "Something's on your mind," she said, moving closer, her curiosity tinged with concern. She had learned to trust the quiet language of his presence, the way his posture and gaze spoke volumes before words ever did. He sighed softly, stepping closer, letting the light from the window highlight the lines of focus etched across his face. "There's something I need to share," he admitted, "not just because it's important, but because it's part of us now, part of this journey we're on together." The seriousness of his tone made her heart beat faster. She had learned to embrace life's uncertainties, but this felt like a new threshold, a challenge that demanded courage in a way she hadn't anticipated. Elena nodded, reaching for his hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," she whispered. The words felt like a promise, a thread of trust woven between them, fragile yet unbreakable. Adrian squeezed her hand, the gesture grounding them both in the certainty that, no matter what lay ahead, they were no longer walking alone. He led her to the study, a room filled with books and artifacts collected from years of travel and experience. He gestured for her to sit, his hands brushing against hers as they moved, and Elena felt a spark of warmth in that simple contact. "I've been offered a project," he began, his voice low, deliberate, "one that will take me away for weeks. It's important, necessary even, and it could shape a future I've been working toward for years." But he paused, the weight of unspoken concern hanging in the air. "I don't want it to take me away from us, not from what we're building here." Elena's heart thudded, a complex rhythm of excitement and anxiety. She understood ambition, responsibility, the drive to make a difference, and yet the thought of distance stirred fear she hadn't anticipated. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "Distance doesn't erase trust. It doesn't erase what we've built." She could see him grappling with the same fear she felt, the fear of losing connection, of moments slipping through their fingers, but she also saw determination. The same strength that had drawn her to him in the first place. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of separation began to shape their rhythm. They spoke on calls and messages, each conversation a thread keeping them tethered, each word a small affirmation of commitment. And yet, the absence was tangible, a reminder that love required resilience, courage, and unwavering belief in the bonds that could survive even distance. During these days apart, Elena discovered strength she hadn't known existed. She learned to lean into her own heart, to nurture her dreams and desires, to embrace moments of solitude not as loneliness, but as opportunities for growth. She wrote letters she never sent, captured thoughts in journals, and allowed herself to feel fully the joys, the fears, the longing, and the quiet exhilaration of knowing that love could persist beyond proximity. When Adrian finally returned, the reunion was nothing short of transformative. They met at the edge of the cliffside villa, rain-soaked but radiant, laughter spilling into the wind as they embraced. In that moment, Elena realized that love was not about constant presence, but about trust, patience, and the willingness to grow individually while growing together. The challenges, the waiting, the uncertainty, they had not weakened them. They had forged a bond stronger, richer, and more resilient than either had imagined possible. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset bleed across the horizon, Adrian spoke softly, brushing a strand of hair from Elena's face. "We faced the storm, the distance, the uncertainty, and here we are, stronger, together, ready for whatever comes next." Elena nodded, tears of relief and joy slipping quietly down her cheeks. She understood now that life's tests were not obstacles meant to break them, but catalysts designed to show them the depth of their courage, the strength of their hearts, and the transformative power of love that persists even in adversity. In that quiet, golden moment, Elena felt the truth in its entirety. Love was not a destination or a guarantee. It was a journey, a series of choices, a relentless commitment to see, to trust, and to grow. And she knew, without doubt, that the story they were writing together would endure, inspiring courage, hope, and the belief that hearts willing to risk, willing to trust, could achieve extraordinary transformation. The air was electric with anticipation as Elena stood on the balcony, the golden hues of sunrise spilling across the ocean like a promise written in light. Today was different, not just another day, not just another moment, but a culmination of everything that had come before. The whispered words, the stolen glances, the storms weathered, the distances bridged, and the courage discovered in the quietest corners of her heart. She felt a tremor of excitement mingled with reverence, as if the universe itself was leaning in to witness what was about to unfold. Adrian joined her silently, the familiar weight of his presence comforting yet thrilling in its intensity. He handed her a cup of tea, the warmth seeping through her fingers, grounding her even as her heart raced with anticipation. For a moment, they simply stood together, letting the sun rise fully, letting the waves crash against the cliffs below, letting the world hold its breath with them. "You've grown," Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken understanding. "Not just through the moments we've shared, but through the moments we've faced apart. You've discovered strength, patience, trust, and most importantly, the courage to embrace life fully." Elena swallowed, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She remembered the hesitant girl who had once feared intimacy, who had built walls to protect herself, who had wondered if love could ever truly exist for someone like her. And now, she recognized herself as someone transformed, someone unafraid to open her heart, to face uncertainty, to step fully into the life she had longed to live. The day unfolded in gentle, deliberate steps. They walked along the cliffs, hands intertwined, laughter mingling with the roar of the waves. They spoke openly, honestly, sharing dreams and fears alike, weaving their hearts together in a tapestry stronger than either had imagined. Each word, each touch, each look carried significance, as if every action was a declaration of trust and commitment to the journey they had chosen together. At noon, They found themselves in the small garden where they had first walked. During that unforgettable honeymoon, the air was fragrant with blooming flowers, the colors vibrant, alive, a reflection of the lives they had cultivated together, both individually and as a couple. Adrian stopped and turned to face Elena, his gaze unwavering, and in that instant, the world seemed to still. "I want you to know," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "that every choice I've made, every step I've taken, has led me to this moment with you. You've shown me what it means to trust, to hope, to open my heart fully, and I can't imagine a life without that. Without you." Elena's breath caught, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy, awe, and relief. She realized, in that moment, that love was not about perfection, nor was it about absence of fear. It was about choice, the daily, intentional act of seeing someone, trusting them, and allowing yourself to be fully known. And she knew that she had chosen, countless times, to step forward, to open herself, to believe in the possibility of a life transformed by love. He took her hands in his, lifting them gently to his lips. "Will you continue this journey with me, not just for moments, but for all the days ahead? Will you let us face the world together, trusting, loving, and growing?" Tears spilled freely down Elena's cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming realization of how far she had come. She nodded, a single, unshakable movement, and whispered, "Yes, with all my heart." The moment stretched, timeless and sacred, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the merging of two lives that had been tested, challenged, and ultimately strengthened by every obstacle along the way. In that embrace, she felt the culmination of every choice she had ever made, every fear she had ever faced, every quiet act of courage that had led her to this point. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the cliffs and ocean with brilliant light, Elena understood something profound. Life was not about waiting for miracles, nor about fearing the storms. It was about opening your heart, taking courageous steps, and allowing love, trust, and hope to guide you even when the path is uncertain. She felt it deep in her chest, a pulse of clarity, power, and unshakable certainty. And in that moment, standing with Adrian as the wind tousled their hair and the waves sang below, Elena realized that love had not simply changed her, it had transformed her entirely. She was no longer the hesitant girl who had once feared the unknown. She was a woman who had dared, who had trusted, who had embraced life fully. And as she stepped forward into the future, hand in hand with the man who had asked the quiet question that began it all, she knew that every moment ahead would be a continuation of this extraordinary, life-changing story they had written together. For the first time, Elena understood completely. Love was not merely a feeling. It was courage. It was choice. It was the power to transform a life, and hers had been transformed forever.